Hi, I am Cleah Mae Mecla and I am the next discussant. Linear versus simultaneous presentation. A sequence of interdependent menus can be used to guide users through a series of choices. For example, an online examination that has sequence of multiple choice test items each made up as a menu, or wizards that steer users through software installation by presenting a sequence of menu options. Linear sequence guide users by presenting one decision at a time and are effective for novice users performing simple tasks. They may be the only possible option for a small display. Simultaneous menus present multiple active menus, also called filters, on a screen at the same time and allow users to enter choices in any order. They require more display space. However, experienced users performing complex tasks benefit from simultaneous menus. Faceted search menus are a very powerful application of simultaneous menus now used extensively in online shopping, library catalogs, and other database searches. Faceted search interfaces allow shoppers looking for trends to narrow the list of results by indicating their choices in the simultaneous menu categories, sleeping capacity, brand, seasons, and so on. Results can be laid out in a row or a grid, and sorting can be done by price or rating. Next is the small displays. While most designs adapt fairly easily from desktop displays to the larger tablets, once the design has been reviewed for touchability, small displays make most desktop designs impractical, and dumbed-down designs are very likely to fail. The smaller the screen, the more temporal the interface becomes, all the way to entirely linear audio interfaces when no display is available. For example, linear sequence of menus are possible, while simultaneous menus are much harder to fit in. On tiny devices such as watches or fitness wearables, a deck of card menu can be used, where each single tap advances to the next choice, and a long press or two-finger press may select the item to access more information. Limited attention-catching ticker menus have also been used. Users don't need to manually scroll or page through the menu items, and with a single touch, they can do the scrolling and select an item in view. On the other hand, having to wait for an item to appear or reappear will be frustrating to some users, especially as the number of items grows. Temptation is great to include menu items just because they fit, but successful designs limit the number of functions to the most essential ones. Following are the design considerations for small display. Simplify, less is more. Strive to reduce or eliminate data entry. Learnability is key. Consider use frequency and importance. Plan for interruptions. Use of contextual information. Make clear what is selectable and what is not. Leave room for scroll and swipe gestures to avoid inadvertent actions. And lastly, consider relegating less important functions to other platforms. They may push other features in less accessible parts of the interface. Relegate them to counterpart applications on desktop or tablet, or eliminate the features altogether. An often mentioned rule of thumb for small devices is less is more. Let's move on to structure and breadth versus depth. When a collection of items grows, designer can form categories of items, creating a tree structure. Some collection can be partitioned easily into mutually exclusive groups with distinctive identifiers. For example, the products in an online grocery store can be organized into categories such as produce, meat, dairy, cleaning products, and so on. Tree-structured menu systems have the power to make large collections of data available to novice or intermittent user. If each menu has 10 items, a menu tree with 4 levels has the capacity to lead an untrained user through a collection of 10,000 destinations. That number would be excessively large for a word processor realistic in a newspaper, a library, or an enterprise web portal. Rules for forming menu trees. Use task semantics to organize menus. Second is to limit the number of levels. Prefer broad shallow to narrow deep. Create groups of logically similar items. Level 1 countries, Level 2 states, Level 3 cities. Form groups that cover all possibilities. For example, age ranges 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, and so on. Make sure that the items are non-overlapping. Use concerts and sports over entertainment and events. Arrange items in each branch by natural sequence, not alphabetically or group-related items. Keep ordering of items fixed or possibly duplicate frequent items in dedicated sections of the menu. Terminology from the user's task domain can help orient the user. Instead of using a title that is vague and emphasizes the computer domain, such as main menu options, use terms such as friendly bank services or simply games. The depth of a menu tree depends in part of the breadth. The depth means number of levels, while breadth is the number of items per level. If more items are put into the main menu, the tree spreads out and has fewer levels. This shape may be advantageous, but only if clarity is preserved. Many empirical studies have dealt with the depth or breadth trade-off, according to Cockburn and Godwin 2008, and the evidence is strong that breadth should be preferred over depth as long as users can anticipate target location at each level. Navigation problem or getting lost or using an inefficient path becomes more and more treacherous as the depth of the hierarchy increases. Screen color must be considered in addition to the semantic organization. Screen space, it is possible to show a large portion of the menu structure and to allow users to rapidly point in the flattened tree structure. Tree structures are appealing. Sometimes network structures are more appropriate. It is helpful to provide site maps and to preserve the notion of levels, as users may feel more comfortable if they have a sense of how far they are from the main menu. For example, in an online shopping, it might makes sense to provide access to banking information from both the personal profile and the checkout section of a link structure. At this moment, I am going to tackle about the sequence, phrasing, and layout. Sequence. Once the items in a menu have been chosen, the designer is still confronted with the choice of presentation sequence. If the items have a natural sequence, such as days of the week, chapters in a book, or sizes of eggs, the decision is trivial. Categorical organization is generally preferable over alphabetical. Using frequency of use does speed up selection of the topmost items, but the loss of a meaningful ordering for low-frequency items may be disruptive, so it is best limited to small lists. Split menu strategy proved appealing, statistically significantly improved performance, and has been adopted by commercial software. Example of this found in Microsoft Office. A font selection menu lists the theme fonts and then the recently used fonts near the top of the menu as well as in the full list, making it easier to quickly select the popular fonts. A thin line separates the sections. Adaptable menu is an attractive alternative to adaptive menus that adapt automatically. One study compared the Microsoft Word version using adaptive menus with variant, providing users with the ability to switch between two modes of operation: the normal full-featured mode and the personal mode that users could customize by selecting which items were included in the menus. Novel approaches have used ephemeral adaptation, according to Findlater et al. 2009, to help users quickly identify important commands. With this technique, a small subset of menu items is immediately shown when the menu is displayed, while the remaining items are gradually faded into view over 100 milliseconds. Phrasing. For single menus, a simple descriptive titles that identify the situation is all that is necessary. For tree-structured menus, choosing titles is more difficult. One helpful rule is to use the words used for the menu items or next pages. For example, it is reassuring to users to find when they select business and financial services, they are shown a display that is titled business, and financial services. Individual words, for example, expansion, may not be familiar to some users, and often two menu items may appear to satisfy the users and only one actually does. For example, disconnect or eject. This enduring problem has no perfect solution, but designers can gather useful feedback from colleagues, users, pilot studies, acceptance tests, and users performing monitoring. The following directives may seem obvious but are listed here because they are so often violated. Use familiar and consistent terminology. Carefully select terminology that is familiar to the designated user community and keep a list of these terms to facilitate consistent use. Ensure that items are distinct from one another. Each item should be distinguished clearly from other items. For example, slow tours of the countryside, journeys with visits to parks, and leisurely voyages are less distinctive than are bike tours, train tours to national parks, and cruise ship tours. Use consistent and concise phrasing. Review the collection of items to ensure consistency and conciseness. Users are likely to feel more comfortable and to be more successful with animal, vegetable, and mineral than with information about animals, vegetable choices you can make, and viewing mineral categories. Bring the keyword to the fore. Try to write menu items such as the first word aids the user in recognizing and discriminating between items. Use size of type instead of set the type size. Then, if the first word indicates that this item is not relevant, users can begin scanning the next item. Lastly is the layout. While the layout of applications and websites can be assisted by the use of templates and website management, tools designer who establish guidelines for consistency across dozens or hundreds of screens will reduce users' anxiety by offering predictability. The following elements can be included. Titles. Some people prefer centered titles, but left justification is also acceptable. Item placement. Typically, items are left justified with the item number or letter preceding the item description. Blank lines may be used to separate meaningful groups of items. If multiple columns are used, a consistent pattern of numbering or lettering should be used. For example, it is easier to scan down columns than across rows. Instructions. The instructions should be identical in each menu and should be placed in the same position. This rule includes instructions about traversals, help, or function key usage. Error messages. If the users make unacceptable choices, the error messages should appear in a consistent position and should use consistent terminology and syntax. Graying out unacceptable choices will help reduce errors. Thank you!
Audio menus found in interactive voice response or IVR systems, Lewis 2010, are useful when hands and eyes are busy, such as when users are driving or testing equipment, and are ubiquitous in phone surveys or services and public access situations that need to accommodate blind or vision impaired users, such as information kiosks or voting machines. With audio menus, instructions prompts and lists of options are spoken to users, who respond by using the keys of a keyboard or phone by speaking. While visual menus have the distinct advantage of persistence, audio menus have to be memorized. Similarly, visual highlighting can confirm user selections, while audio menus have to provide confirmation step following the selection. The combination of form fill-ins, menus, and custom widgets such as calendars or maps supports rapid navigation for a vast array of applications, from airline ticket booking to triage of new patients in the emergency room. There is paucity of empirical research on form fill-in, but several design guidelines have emerged from practitioners, Jarrett and Gaffney 2008. Software tools simplify design, help to ensure consistency, ease maintenance, and speed implementation. But even with excellent tools, the designer must still make many complex decisions. The elements of form fill-in design include the following. First, meaningful title. Identify the topic and avoid computer terminology. Second, Comprehensible instructions. Describe the user's stance in familiar terminology. Be brief. If more information is needed, make a set of help screens available to the novice user. A useful rule is to use the word type for entering information and the word press for special keys such as the tab, enter, or cursor movement arrow keys. Third, label the fields. Place the label in a consistent location. For example, top or left of the field. A less desirable location is to place labels inside the fields using a grayed out font. It saves space, but the labels disappear as soon as users start typing, requiring users to remember what is needed, which often leads to errors. Fourth, limit data entry. Make sure all fields are really needed. Carefully set default value. For example, use the current location. This is particularly important for small displays, for example, using only the zip code instead of the city and state. These are additional form fill-in guidelines for small displays. Include only critical data fields. Break long forms into multiple smaller ones. Use sensible defaults, example, current location or date. Place short labels on top of the fields, not their left. And lastly, set touch keyboard to match the data. For example, numeric keyboard to enter a number. Sixth guideline. Explanatory messages for fields. Information about a field. For example, your email address will be the username of your account, or its permissible values should appear in a standard position, such as next to or below the field, preferably using a different font and style. Seventh, error prevention. Where possible, prevent users from entering incorrect values. For example, in a field requiring a whole number, do not allow the user to enter letters or decimal points. Next, error recovery. Summarize errors at the top of the page. Highlight errors in the form. If the user enters unacceptable values, indicate permissible values for the field. For example, if the zip code is entered as 28121 or 2380, the message might be, zip codes should have 5 digits. Next, immediate feedback. Immediate feedback about errors is preferable. When feedback can be provided only after the entire form has been submitted, the location of the field needing correction should be made clearly visible. Next, logical grouping and sequencing of fields. Related fields should be adjacent and should be aligned with the blank spaces for separation between groups. The sequencing should reflect common patterns. For example, city followed by state followed by zip code. And the next is visually appealing layout of the form. Alignment creates a feeling of order and comprehensibility. For example, the field labels name, address, and city can be right justified so the data entry fields are vertically aligned. Next, familiar field labels. Common terms should be used. If home address were replaced by domicile, many users would be uncertain or anxious about what to enter. Next, consistent terminology and abbreviations. Prepare a list of terms and acceptable abbreviations and use the list diligently, making additions only after careful consideration. Visible space and boundaries for data entry fields. Users should be able to see the size of the field and anticipate whether abbreviations or other training strategies will be needed. Convenient cursor movement. Provide a mechanism for moving the cursor between fields using the keyboard, such as the tab key or cursor movement arrows. Next, required field clearly marked. For fields that must be filled in, the word required or some indicator, for example asterisk, should be visible. Optional fields should follow required fields whenever possible. Privacy and data sharing information. Users will be anxious sharing their personal information and want to know how the data will be used and who will have access to it. Next, accessibility. For example, make sure the forms are navigable with screen reader. And lastly, completion signal. It should be clear to the users what they must do when they are finished filling the fields. Generally, designers should avoid automatic form submission when the final field is filled in because users may wish to review or alter previous field entries. Using custom widgets and direct manipulation interaction, techniques can facilitate data entry and reduce errors. Calendars can be used to enter dates. Seating maps can help users select airplane seats, and menus using photographs might clarify choices of pizza style. Pay special attention to such common fields as this. First, telephone numbers. Offer a form to indicate the subfields. Be alert to special cases such as the addition of extension or the need of a non-standard format of international numbers. When the user has typed all the needed digits of a field, the cursor should jump to the leftmost position of the next field. Next is time. Even though the 24-hour clock is convenient, many people in the United States find it confusing and prefer AM and PM designations. Next, dollar amounts or other currency. The currency sign should appear on the screen so users enter only the amount. If a large number of whole dollar amounts are to be entered, users might be presented with a field such as with a cursor to the left of the decimal point. Next is passwords. When asked to type a password, users also need a means to retrieve or change the password if they have forgotten it. But it is also important to avoid malicious use of the functionality. For example, two-factor identification, password and a code sent to a separate device, is strongly recommended for a back application or an email password change. These are the guidelines for password creation. First, use two-factor authentication for secure accounts. Second, indicate the rules for password creation. Next, ask for the password to be entered a second time. Next, hide the password with asterisk by default for privacy. Provide an option to unhide the password. And lastly, provide feedback encouraging strong password selection. And lastly, CAPTCHAs. A CAPTCHA, acronym for Completely Automated Public Turing Test to tell computers and humans apart, requires users to type text presented graphically to be eligible to computers. Including an audio option is necessary to make the CAPTCHA accessible to users with visual impairments. Dialog box design combines menu selection and form fill-in issues with additional concerns about consistency across potentially hundreds of dialog boxes and relationships with other items on the screen. A guidelines document for dialog boxes will help strive for consistency. Since dialog boxes usually pop up on top of some portion of the screen, there is a danger that they will obscure relevant information. Therefore, dialog boxes should be as small as reasonable to minimize the overlap and visual disruption. Next, dialog boxes should appear near but not on top of the related screen items. When a user clicks on a city on a map, the dialog box about the city should appear just next to the click point. And lastly, dialog boxes should be distinct enough that users can easily distinguish them from the background, but should not be so harsh as to be visually disruptive. On desktop computers, keyboard shortcuts are essential to speed the response to dialog boxes.